Hey guys, it's Kaboose from Envy's Valorant team. Today we're going to be taking a look at crosshairs, about how to set up your own crosshair, what crosshair I use, and some advantages and disadvantages between the two. When you load up Valorant for the first time, you may notice your crosshair doesn't exactly look like this. This is because of the crosshair setting menu. Pretty much all pros adjust their crosshairs to something more of their preference, and we're going to go ahead and walk through pretty much all these crosshair settings, talk about what's optimal, what's preference, so we'll get started right on that. We're going to go start on Crosshair Color. This is a big preference one. However, green and white do work very well in this game due to the color of like Phoenix firewalls, Viper ults, stuff like that. So green and white are good, but this is all preference. It's not very important. Outlines, same thing. This isn't really going to affect too much. And then you have the outline opacity, the outline thickness. You can see you can adjust this a lot. I wouldn't go higher than 1 on this thickness. It just becomes way too big. Then opacity is preference. Center dot, this is an interesting one. A lot of people like this for like Vandal aim. You can get like long range headshots. You know, you have a dot in the middle of your crosshair, and then you still have like a decent enough gap for spraying. So this is something you might want to try out. And then we'll move down, same thing, center dot opacity and thickness. I wouldn't go over 2 thickness on the dot because the way monitor pixels work is if you go above 1 thickness on this dot, it's not actually centered. If we adjust it, see how it kind of like moves? It's more on the bottom right. It's bigger. It's not actually on the center of our screen. So you want to keep the center dot thickness at 1 if you do decide to use it. Fade crosshair with firing error, you always want to turn this off. Basically, if you spray, see how that top line becomes invisible? We don't want that setting. We want the crosshair to consistently look the same. It's going to make us more consistent for sure, so definitely keep this one off. Show spectator player crosshair, you can do whatever. That's just if you're dead and you're watching your teammate, it'll show their crosshair. Disable crosshair, of course, we want to keep that off. Now here's the actual crosshair settings. We're going to have inner lines. These are the most important ones. So we'll walk through this. Show inner lines, we want this on. The inner line opacity, so basically the transparency of the crosshair. This, most of the time, you'll want to keep at 1. You could do like some fancy cool crosshairs with less opacity, but most of the time you want to just keep this 1. It's the easiest to see. There's no reason really to not have it at 1, so this is the best setting for it. Now length, here's the interesting one. You can pretty much go from a super small crosshair like this to a ginormous crosshair like this. So the range you find, it's really going to be all preference to you. Most people will use either like in the 3 to 4 range around this length. They like it really small. They can maybe fit the head super easily in the crosshair, just super small like that. Me personally, the highest crosshair size I've used is size 9. Something about these big crosshairs feels like you can spray easy, head just kind of fit into them. That's my preference. It's all preference, so definitely try out big crosshair, small crosshair, medium. Just mess around with it till you find something super comfortable to you. Next, we're going to move on to the thickness. There's pretty much only 2 settings you want to use here. It's either 1 or 2. Anything more than this it just gets too thick. It's going to be hard to kill people in long range, stuff like that. So stick with 1 and 2 here. They're going to be your best options for visibility. And then if we turn this dot off, now we have the offset. This is like the gap of your crosshair. So I use a 5 like this. This is actually considered like a big gap compared to average. You can see they fit really well. The bot's head fit really well into the crosshair, depending on what range I'm on. Like long range, it fits well. Medium range, it fits well. Whereas if I'm on like a tight gap like this, it's much harder to like line up the shot. So big gap, small gap, and again, another big preference thing, you want to mess around with this a lot. See if you're a big gap or a small gap type player. Movement error, this is something you always want off. Basically, if you're moving and you're inaccurate, your crosshair is going to be huge. This could be good for beginners that are still learning when to shoot, when they're accurate, stuff like that, but I still don't recommend it because you're not going to learn crosshair placement with a crosshair like this. You just aren't going to have good crosshair placement, and I think that's much more important. And then firing error, this is a setting not a lot of people use, but I actually really like. Basically, it's going to make your crosshair expand with the recoil. So you see it'll open up like that and then get smaller. I actually really like this because spraying, especially with the Phantom, there's actually a little trick. If you use the top line of your top crosshair and you kind of just keep that line where the spray is, it'll spray like perfectly on the wall. So if I'm pulling down and I'm just keeping the top of my the crosshair on the center, it's gonna be hitting in the center most of the time. So we just kind of like keep that there, and it's super simple. Just keeping the top line on target, and then everything just kind of hits. So if you want to maybe get good at spraying, it's definitely a good idea to try it. Not a lot of people use this setting, but I think it's pretty good. And then we're gonna run into the fancy outer line settings. I actually don't mess with these at all. I don't think there's much reason to, but it's basically another set of crosshair lines. I think if I move it out like this, yeah. So it's basically another set of crosshair lines you can adjust. I mean, if you want to get real fancy with your crosshair, you can use them, but no pros use them. They're pretty unnecessary, so I'd kind of just recommend staying away from them, honestly. And then same thing, it comes with its opacity, length, thickness, and offset, and then movement error, firing error. But again, I'd recommend just setting everything to 0 and off. So this is the crosshair I use. It's a white with outline 1515. So skim through, these are all the settings I use. So basically, I'm playing with this crosshair. The gap feels really comfortable to me. I'm mostly a Phantom player, so I'm playing like close range. A lot of close range fights because I want to take advantage of the close range headshots of the Phantom. And when I'm close range like this, the bigger gap just feels much more comfortable to me. It feels like you can kind of just put the bot's head a lot easier when they're close to you. And since it's a duel that I will be taking more often than not, I kind of built my crosshair around this. The white and the outline pretty much come from good visibility. You know, there's no utility in the game that's gonna mess with my crosshair. I was using a green crosshair in the past, and I did actually change because Viper walls and green crosshairs blend perfectly. So you can't see your crosshair through a Viper wall. So this white with outlines, I found for me is the best to always be able to see my crosshair, always know exactly where it's at. The length, it's not too big, it's not too small. It's kind of like in the middle. Definitely a personal preference thing. Most people would have a crosshair actually a little smaller than this. But again, it's all preference. You want to just use what feels comfortable to you. Mess around, go into the range, use something for 5 minutes, change it up a little bit, use it for 5 minutes, see if it feels better, and just adjust. And once you find your perfect crosshair, keep using it. It'll get really consistent on it, and that's how you find your crosshair. This has been the baseline crosshair setup. I hope y'all enjoyed and got something out of this video. This has been Kaboose, and I'll see y'all next time.